Pretending to be bankrupt, I begged for shelter. My rich sons slammed the door in my face. Only my youngest, a poor mechanic, took me in and sold his wedding ring to feed me. Next morning, my lawyer arrived with a $58 million check, and the look on their faces was priceless. I'm Harrison Caldwell, 75 years old, and tonight I learned that blood is not thicker than money. I spent 50 years building Caldwell Logistics, from a single rusted truck into an empire that moves freight across 40 states. I gave my children everything: private schools, Ivy League degrees, and enough seed capital to build their own kingdoms. But as I stood shivering on the sidewalk outside the Drake Hotel in Chicago, wearing a coat I bought from a thrift store for $3, I realized I had raised wolves, not sons. Before I tell you how I lost my dignity only to buy it back for $58 million, please hit the subscribe button and tell me in the comments what time it is where you are. Watching from reading your comments is the only thing that warms this old man's heart tonight. The wind off Lake Michigan was biting, cutting right through the holes in my woolen gloves. My reflection in the hotel glass doors looked pathetic. A hunched-over old man with matted gray hair and a smell that was a mix of old grease and wet dog. It was a disguise, of course, a test, but as I reached for the golden handle of the entrance, the heavy hand of a security guard clamped down on my shoulder, like a vice. "You are lost, pal. The soup kitchen is 6 blocks east. Move along." The guard did not even look me in the eye. He just saw the rags and made a decision. I pulled away my joints, aching from the cold. "I am not looking for soup. I am looking for my son," I said, my voice raspy from hours of practicing this desperate tone inside my empty penthouse. "Preston Caldwell, he is hosting the gala inside." The guard laughed, a dry, humorless sound that made my stomach turn. "Yeah, and I am the King of England. Get lost." Before I call the cops, I peered past him into the ballroom inside. It was a sea of black ties and designer gowns. The room glowed with the light of crystal chandeliers that cost more than most people earn in a decade. And there he was, Preston, my eldest son, the CEO of a real estate firm I funded with $2 million cash 10 years ago. He was holding a glass of champagne, laughing at something a senator was whispering in his ear. He looked successful. He looked powerful. He looked nothing like the little boy who used to cry when he scraped his knee, begging me to fix it. "Preston," I shouted, lunging past the guard before he could stop me. "Preston, it is Dad." The silence that fell over the entrance hall was immediate and suffocating. Heads turned, the music seemed to stop. Preston froze, his smile did not drop. Immediately, it just became rigid like a crack in a windshield. He turned slowly, his eyes scanning the room until they landed on me. For a second, I saw a flicker of recognition followed instantly by a wave of pure, unadulterated horror. He did not see his father. He saw a stain on his perfect evening. He saw a liability. He marched over to me, his polished Italian leather shoes clicking aggressively on the marble floor. He stopped 3 feet away, as if fearing my poverty might be contagious. "Who let this man in, Preston?" hissed at the security guard, not even addressing me yet. "Get him out of here now." "Preston, it is me. It is your father." I stepped into the light, pulling down the dirty scarf I had wrapped around my neck. "Look at me, son." Preston blinked, the color drained from his face, leaving him pale beneath his expensive tan. He stepped closer, lowering his voice to a dangerous whisper. "Dad, what the hell are you doing? You look like a hobo. The senator is 10 feet away. You are humiliating me." I did not break character. I let my shoulders slump. I let the tears I had been holding back well up in my eyes. "Preston, I lost it all. The company, the investments, everything. The bank took the Lake Forest mansion at 4 o'clock this afternoon. They foreclosed on me, son. I have nowhere to go. My credit cards are frozen. I do not even have money for a taxi." I watched his face, searching for concern, searching for shock. Searching for love, I found none of it. Instead, I saw a calculation. He was doing the math in his head, realizing that if I was broke, I was no longer an asset, I was a debt. "You lost the mansion," Preston asked, his voice devoid of sympathy. "You mean the one you promised to leave to me in the will?" "They took it all." "Preston, I am on the street. I just need a place to sleep. Just for tonight, let me crash on your sofa. I will be gone in the morning before your guests wake up, please. Son, I am cold." Preston looked around nervously, checking to see if anyone was listening. He grabbed my arm, his fingers digging into my bicep painfully. "Look, you cannot stay here. You cannot be seen with me like this. Do you know how hard I have worked to get these investors here tonight? If they see my father looking like a dumpster diver, my stock price drops 10% by morning." I stared at him, stunned. "So that is it. My value to you is tied to your stock price." I wiped my nose on my sleeve intentionally, emphasizing my pathetic state. "I changed your diapers, Preston. I paid for your Harvard tuition. I gave you the down payment for your first 3 apartment complexes. And you are worried about your stock price. Keep your voice down," he snapped, pushing me back towards the revolving doors. "Go to a shelter. Go to a motel. I do not care. Just get out of my sight. I will have my assistant wire you $100 in the morning if you promise to leave Chicago." $100, the insult felt like a physical slap. This was the boy who crashed his Porsche 3 times in college, and I replaced it every single time without a lecture. Suddenly, the sharp clicking of high heels approached. It was Tiffany, Preston's wife, my daughter-in-law. She was wearing a silver dress that probably cost enough to feed a family for a year. Her eyes were sharp, cold, and zeroed in on my dirty coat. "Preston, what is that smell?" She wrinkled her nose, waving her hand in front of her face like she was wafting away a bad odor. "Oh my God, is that your father?" "Tiffany, help me," I pleaded, extending a trembling hand towards her. "We are family." "Don't touch me," she shrieked, jumping back as if I were a leper. "You will get grease on my Valentino gown." She turned to Preston, her face twisting into a mask of disgust. "Preston, get him out of here. The senator is asking about the smell. It is embarrassing. He is leaving." Preston assured her, his hand shoving my chest. "He was just leaving." I planted my feet, digging my worn-out boots into the plush red carpet of the lobby. "I am not leaving until you look me in the eye and tell me that you are throwing your own father out into the freezing cold because he ran out of money. Is that who you are?" Preston looked at me. His eyes were dead cold, like shark eyes. "Yes," he said flatly. "That is exactly who I am. You had a good run. Old man, you should have saved better security. Get this trash out of my hotel, trash." The word hung in the air as the security guard grabbed me again, tighter this time. Tiffany stepped forward. She was holding a glass of dark red Cabernet Sauvignon. She looked at me, then looked at the guard. "Wait," she said. A cruel smile played on her lips. She walked right up to me, invading my personal space. "Make sure he never comes back." Tilted her glass and watched as the dark red wine poured over my chest, soaking into the dirty wool of my coat, staining the white shirt underneath, running down my skin like cold blood. "Oops," she said, deadpan, "clumsy me. Now you really do look like a drunk. Get him out of here before he vomits on the rug." The shock of the cold liquid made me gasp. The guests who had gathered to watch the commotion laughed. A few of them actually laughed. My son did not laugh, but he did not stop her either. He just turned his back, adjusting his cufflinks, preparing to walk back into the warmth of his party. "Get off me," I shouted, shaking off the guard. "One last time, I will walk out myself." I looked at Preston's back. "I hope the party is worth it, son. I really hope it is worth it." He did not turn around. The guard shoved me through the revolving doors, and I stumbled out onto the concrete. The wind hit me instantly, freezing the wine on my chest. I fell to my knees in the snow. The humiliating laughter of the gala fading as the heavy glass doors swung shut behind me. I sat there for a moment in the snow, staring at the golden light spilling out from the windows. I could see them inside toasting, clinking glasses, celebrating their wealth. And here I was, the man who made it all possible, sitting in the slush like a discarded wrapper. But as the cold seeped into my bones, something else ignited in my chest. It was not sadness anymore. It was clarity. For years, I had wondered if my children loved me, or just loved my wallet. Tonight, I got my answer. The experiment had begun, and the results were already brutal. But I had 2 more stops to make, 2 more children to test. And as I picked myself up, shivering violently, I touched the hidden pocket inside my coat, where my real phone was recording everything. The night was young, and the reckoning was just beginning. I began the long walk to the train station. My next stop was the Gold Coast penthouse of my second son, Bradley. He was a day trader, a gambler in a suit. Maybe he would be different. Maybe he would remember the time I sat by his hospital bed for 3 weeks when he had appendicitis. Maybe. But as I walked into the darkness, leaving the lights of Preston's party behind, I had a sinking feeling that the apple did not fall far from the rotten tree. The steel gate of the hotel courtyard slammed shut with a finality that echoed in my hollow chest. I lay there for a moment in the slush, the cold seeping through the thin fabric of my thrift store trousers, biting into my skin like 1,000 tiny needles. The red wine Tiffany had poured on me was beginning to freeze, turning the front of my coat into a stiff, sticky breastplate of humiliation. I stared at the closed gate, my mind drifting back 10 years. I remembered the day I handed Preston that check for $2 million. It was a sunny afternoon in May, right after his MBA graduation. We were sitting on the terrace of the very mansion he had just thrown me out of. He had wept, actually wept, promising me that he would build an empire that would make me proud, that he would always take care of the family legacy. He had called me his hero that day. Now to him, the hero was just a zero, a liability to be discarded like a piece of defective machinery. I forced myself to stand, my knees cracking audibly in the quiet alleyway. I brushed the wet snow from my legs, though it made little difference. I was already soaked to the bone. The physical pain was sharp, but it was a dull throb compared to the agony of what I had just witnessed. My eldest son, the one I had groomed to be the patriarch, was devoid of a soul. But I could not stop now. The experiment had to be completed. I had to know the full extent of the rot in my family tree before I could cut out the disease. I began the trek toward the Gold Coast, the wind off Lake Michigan whipping my face, turning my cheeks raw. It was a 3-mile walk to the penthouse of my second son, Bradley. Every step was a battle. I passed by the high-end boutiques on Michigan Avenue, stores where I had once bought suits that cost more than the average car. I saw my reflection in a shop window, and for a second I did not recognize myself. I looked like a ghost, a specter haunting the city I had helped build. People walked past me, giving me a wide berth, their eyes sliding over me as if I were invisible, or worse, a piece of filth that might soil their shoes. It was a perspective I had never seen from the back of a limousine. Bradley. My mind shifted to my second son. If Preston was the calculated, cold businessman, Bradley was the fire. He was a day trader, a gambler who played with millions on the stock market and cryptocurrency. He had always been the emotional one, the one who wore his heart on his sleeve. I remembered when he was 12 and found a bird with a broken wing in the yard. He had nursed it for weeks, crying when it finally died. I held on to that memory like a lifeline as I walked. Maybe that boy was still in there somewhere beneath the Armani suits and the obsession with status. Maybe Bradley would understand what it felt like to lose everything, because he lived his life on the edge of financial ruin every day. By the time I reached his building, a sleek glass tower that pierced the night sky, my fingers were so numb I could barely feel them. I knew I could not walk through the front door. The doorman there was new. He would not know me, and even if he did, he would not let a vagrant into the lobby. I waited in the shadows of the service entrance, shivering violently, until a pizza delivery driver buzzed in. As the door swung open, I slipped in behind him, keeping my head down, praying the camera did not catch my face. I made it to the freight elevator, and pressed the button for the 40th floor. The ride up felt like an eternity. I leaned against the metal wall of the elevator, trying to compose myself. I needed to look desperate, but I did not have to try very hard. I was desperate. I was desperate for a shred of humanity from my own blood. When the doors slid open, I stepped into the private hallway that led to his penthouse. I could hear him before I even reached the door. Bradley was shouting, his voice echoing through the heavy mahogany wood. I raised my hand and knocked. The shouting stopped abruptly. A moment later, the door was yanked open. Bradley stood there, and he looked like a man on the brink of a nervous breakdown. His expensive silk dress shirt was unbuttoned halfway down his chest, revealing a sheen of sweat. His hair, usually gelled to perfection, was standing up in wild tufts where he had run his hands through it. He was wearing a Bluetooth headset, the blue light blinking frantically. Behind him inside the apartment, I could see a wall of computer monitors flashing red charts and graphs. The air smelled of stale coffee and fear. He stared at me, blinking rapidly, as if his brain could not process the image in front of him. He did not say hello, he did not ask if I was okay, he just looked at my rags, then at my face, and his eyes narrowed in confusion and irritation. "Dad," he asked, but the word came out like an accusation. "What the hell is going on? Why do you look like you just crawled out of a sewer?" I tried to step inside, seeking the warmth radiating from the apartment, but Bradley moved quickly, blocking the doorway with his body. He did not invite me in. He stood his ground, guarding his sanctuary. "Bradley," I said, my voice trembling partly from the cold and partly from the act. "I need help. I lost the company. The bank took everything. I have nowhere to go." Bradley held up a hand, cutting me off. He tapped his headset. Hang on," he shouted at whoever was on the line. "No, do not sell the yen yet. Hold the position." I said, "Hold it." He looked back at me, his face twisting in annoyance. "Dad, are you serious right now? You picked tonight of all nights to have a crisis. Do you have any idea what is happening in the Asian markets? The yen is crashing. I am down $400,000 since dinner." I looked past him at the sprawling living room. It was a bachelor's paradise of white leather and chrome, cold and sterile. "I am sorry about the markets, Bradley," I said softly. "But I am talking about my life. I am homeless. I just walked 3 miles in the snow. I need a place to sleep." Bradley let out a harsh, incredulous laugh. "Sleep? You want to sleep here? Dad, look at you. You are a mess. I have investors coming over at 7 a.m. to discuss a bailout. I cannot have you sleeping on my couch looking like a cautionary tale. It is bad energy. I need to project success, not failure." He was not even listening to me. He was listening to the ticker tape in his head. To him, I was just another plummeting stock, a bad investment he needed to dump before it dragged down his portfolio. "I am your father, Bradley." I whispered, the hope I had held on to beginning to shatter. "I sat by your bed for 3 weeks when you had appendicitis. I paid off your first 3 margin calls when you were learning to trade. You promised you would never forget that." "That was business," Bradley snapped, wiping sweat from his forehead. "And this is business too. I am drowning here, Dad. I have a margin call in 20 minutes. If I do not wire 100 grand to the brokerage, they liquidate my positions. I am literally fighting for my life." "Fighting for your life," I repeated, looking at the Rolex on his wrist. The artwork on the wall's worth more than most houses. "You do not know what fighting for your life is. Fighting for your life is wondering if you will freeze to death before sunrise." Bradley rolled his eyes, a gesture so dismissive it hurt more than a physical blow. "Okay, stop with the dramatics. I know why you are really here. You want money, right? You want a bailout. Well, get in line." "I do not want money," I said, and for the first time that night I let my voice drop to a plead. "I am hungry, Bradley. I have not eaten since yesterday. I just want some food, a sandwich, leftovers, anything." Bradley looked at me with pure disdain. He sighed a long, exaggerated sound of inconvenience. He reached into the pocket of his slacks and pulled out a crumpled bill. He did not hand it to me. He tossed it. The bill fluttered through the air and landed on the doormat between my wet boots. It was a $20 bill. "There," he said, turning back to his screens. "Go find a diner, get a sandwich, get a coffee. Just do it somewhere else. And do not come back here tonight. Amber is coming over later." "Amber?" I asked, staring at the green paper on the floor. "My fiancée," he said, though he sounded more like he was talking about a trophy than a partner. "She is a swimsuit model, Dad. She is very particular about aesthetics. If she sees a homeless man in my doorway, even if it is you, it kills the mood. She hates poor people. It gives her anxiety." He started to close the door. "I am serious, Dad. Take the money and go. I have to take this call." He did not wait for an answer. The heavy door swung shut, and I heard the lock click into place. I stood there in the silent hallway staring at the $20 bill on the mat. My own son, the boy who used to cry over a dead bird, had just paid me $20 to disappear because I ruined the aesthetic for his model girlfriend. I bent down slowly, my joints screaming in protest, and picked up the bill. My hand was shaking, not from the cold this time, but from a rage that was burning hot and fierce in my gut. I looked at the closed door one last time. I could hear him screaming, "Bye, bye, bye," from inside. He was trying to buy his future, unaware that he had just sold his soul for a margin call. I pocketed the money. I would keep it. Not to spend, but as evidence. As a reminder of exactly what I was worth to Bradley Caldwell. $20. I turned back to the elevator. The descent felt faster this time. I walked out of the building and back into the biting wind. The city lights blurred through the tears I refused to let fall. 2 suns down. 2 rejections. 2 betrayals. My heart felt like a stone in my chest, heavy and cold. I had one card left to play. One last stop. Lucas, my youngest, the black sheep, the one who had disappointed me the most. Or so I had thought. Lucas, who had refused to go to business school. Lucas, who had married a waitress and opened a garage in the South Side, the part of town I never visited. I had cut him off 5 years ago. I had called him a failure. I had told him he was wasting his potential, fixing other people's mistakes. We had not spoken since. If my successful sons, the ones I had molded in my own image, had treated me like garbage, what would the son I had rejected do? Logic told me he would slam the door harder than anyone. He had every right to. He owed me nothing. I had given him nothing but criticism. But as I hailed a taxi using the last of my hidden cash reserves to pay for the ride to the South Side, a strange feeling settled over me. It wasn't hope exactly. It was curiosity. I had stripped away the facade of wealth, and I had seen the ugliness of greed. Now I was going to the one place where greed had no home to see if anything else lived there. The taxi driver looked at me in the rearview mirror, his eyes wary. "You sure about this address, buddy?" he asked. "This ain't exactly a tourist spot." "Just drive," I said, leaning my head against the cold window. "I have family there." Family. The word tasted like ash in my mouth. I closed my eyes as the city landscape changed from towering skyscrapers to boarded-up storefronts and dimly lit streets. I was about to find out if I had any family left at all. The taxi driver dumped me 3 blocks from the address I gave him, refusing to go any further into the dark labyrinth of the South Side. He took the crumpled bills I had hidden in my shoe and sped off, leaving me in a silence that felt heavier than the noise of the city center. The wind here was different. It did not just blow, it screamed, tearing through the narrow alleys with a violence I had never felt in my climate-controlled office or the back seat of my heated car. The temperature had dropped to 10 below zero, and every breath felt like inhaling shattered glass. I wrapped my thin thrift store coat tighter around me, but it was useless against the Chicago winter. The cold was a living thing, hunting for any exposed skin, finding the gaps in my disguise and sinking its teeth into my old bones. I started walking, keeping my head down, my eyes scanning the cracked pavement covered in black ice. The streetlights here were sparse and half of them were broken, casting long jagged shadows that seemed to move on their own. I was Harrison Caldwell, a man who could move fleets of trucks across the continent with a single phone call. But right now I was just an old man walking through a graveyard of rusted cars and boarded-up windows, hoping to find the son I had discarded. "Hey, old man." The voice came from the shadows of a derelict bus stop. I froze, my heart hammering against my ribs, not from the cold, but from a primal fear I had not felt since I was a child. 3 figures stepped out into the dim light. Teenagers wearing hoodies, their faces obscured, but their intent clear. They moved with the predatory confidence of wolves spotting a wounded deer. "I do not have anything," I said, my voice trembling, the steam from my breath vanishing instantly in the freezing air. "I am just looking for a place to sleep." One of them laughed, a sharp sound like a cracking branch. He stepped closer, and I saw the glint of a knife, a small, cheap blade that could end my life just as easily as a bullet. "You got a coat," he said, shoving me hard against the brick wall of an abandoned warehouse. "And you got shoes. Take them off." "Please," I begged, the desperation no longer an act. "I will freeze to death. It is 10 below zero." "Do I look like the Weather Channel?" he snapped, pressing the cold steel of the blade against my neck. The metal burned my skin. "Give it up or bleed out here. Nobody comes down this street till morning." My hands shook uncontrollably as I unbuttoned the coat, the very coat I had bought to play the part of a beggar. Ironically, now I was fighting to keep it, the $20 bill. Bradley had thrown at me fell out of the pocket, fluttering onto the snow like a dead leaf. The kid snatched it up, his eyes lighting up at the meager score. $20, he scoffed. "Is that it? You are pathetic, old man." He ripped the coat from my arms, leaving me in just a thin flannel shirt and trousers. The cold hit me like a physical blow, a sledgehammer to the chest, stealing the air from my lungs. They took my boots too, leaving me in wet socks on the ice. They laughed as they ran off, their footsteps crunching in the snow, fading into the darkness, leaving me shivering so violently my teeth clattered together with a sound that echoed in the empty street. I sank to my knees, the pain in my feet, instantaneous and agonizing. I was not pretending anymore. I was not the billionaire testing his heirs. I was a 75-year-old man dying in an alleyway, stripped of his dignity and his warmth. The reality of poverty, the kind I had only seen on the news or in spreadsheets, slammed into me. It was not just a lack of money, it was a lack of safety. It was the constant, terrifying vulnerability of being prey. I forced myself to crawl, then to stand, using the brick wall for support. I had to keep moving, or I would die right there, turning into a frozen statue. By sunrise, I shuffled forward, my wet socks, numbness creeping up my legs, turning my feet into blocks of ice, and I do not know how far I walked, time distorted by the cold, but eventually I saw a light. It was a faint yellow glow spilling out from under a rolling metal door. The sign above it was hand-painted, peeling, and faded. But I could still read the letters, Caldwell Repairs. Seeing my family name on that rusted metal sheet made my chest tighten. The garage was a small cinder block building that looked like a strong wind would knock it over. There were piles of old tires stacked out front, covered in snow, and a rusted tow truck parked at an odd angle. But to me, that yellow light looked like the gates of heaven. I stumbled toward it, my vision blurring at the edges, darker spots dancing in my eyes. I reached the metal door and pounded on it with my frozen fist once, twice, before my legs finally gave out, and I collapsed onto the concrete, the world spinning wildly. The sound of the door rolling up was a screech of metal on metal, grinding and harsh. A silhouette appeared, backlit by the warm light from inside, a man in greasy coveralls holding a wrench like a weapon ready to defend. "His shop, we are closed," the man shouted, his voice tired and rough. Come back in the morning, Lucas, I whispered, but the sound was too weak to carry. I tried to lift my head, but my neck muscles refused to cooperate. The man stepped closer, cautious boots crunching on the snow. He shined a flashlight in my face, the beam blinding me for a second. Then the light wavered, dropped, and I heard the wrench clatter to the ground. Dad. The word was a gasp, a mix of disbelief and horror. Lucas fell to his knees beside me, not caring about the snow or the oil stains on his pants. He grabbed my shoulders, his hands large and calloused, but incredibly gentle. He turned me over, and I saw his face for the first time in 5 years. He looked older, tired lines etched deep around his eyes and grease smudged on his cheek. But his eyes were the same kind eyes that used to look at me with adoration before I crushed his dreams, Lucas. I wheezed, I am sorry, shh, do not talk. Lucas said, his voice thick with emotion. He did not ask why I was there. He did not ask where my coat was or why I smelled like the streets. He just saw his father dying in the snow. He scooped me up in his arms, lifting me as if I weighed nothing, carrying me out of the biting wind and into the garage. The warmth inside hit me like a physical wave, bringing feeling back to my skin in painful prickles. The smell of motor oil and stale coffee filled my nose. The best perfume I had ever smelled. Lucas kicked the door shut behind us, sealing out the cruel night. He carried me past a half-disassembled sedan and up a narrow, creaking flight of wooden stairs to the small living quarters above the shop. Sarah, help me! Lucas shouted, kicking open the door at the top of the stairs. It is Dad. The apartment was tiny, a single room that served as kitchen, living room, and bedroom. The walls were thin and I could feel the draft even inside, but it was clean. There was a small heater glowing orange in the corner, fighting a losing battle against the Chicago winter. Sarah. Lucas' wife stood up from the small table where she had been eating. She was heavily pregnant, one hand instinctively going to her swollen belly, her eyes widening in shock when she saw the bundle of rags in her husband's arms. Oh my God. Harry, she breathed, rushing over, pulling the only blanket off their bed without hesitation. She did not look at me with disgust like Tiffany had. She did not look at me with annoyance like Bradley had. She looked at me with pure, unadulterated concern. Put him on the sofa. Lucas, she instructed, clearing away a stack of baby clothes she had been mending. Get the soup, he is freezing. Lucas laid me down gently on the lumpy sofa, the springs groaning under my weight. Sarah immediately tucked the wool blanket around me, tucking it under my chin, rubbing my frozen hands between hers, trying to transfer her warmth to me. Her hands were rough from work, but her touch was tender. I will get the broth, Lucas said, disappearing into the kitchenette. I heard the sound of a microwave beeping. I looked around the room as the shivering began to subside, replaced by a deep, aching exhaustion. The furniture was mismatched, clearly, salvaged from curbsides. The paint was peeling in the corners. There were buckets catching drips from the ceiling. But on the walls there were photos of me and Lucas from years ago, fishing trips, birthdays, moments I had forgotten, but he had cherished. And on the table a single bowl of instant noodles sat half-eaten clearly. Their dinner, Lucas came back with a steaming mug of broth. Here, Dad, drink this slow. He supported my head, helping me take small sips. The hot liquid scalded my throat in the best way possible, spreading heat through my chest. I looked at him, really looked at him. He was wearing a faded mechanic jumpsuit patched at the elbows. He looked exhausted, his eyes red-rimmed from overwork. But he was here feeding the father who had called him a failure and cut him off without a dime, Lucas, I said. My voice stronger now, looking at the instant noodles on the table. Is that all you have to eat? Lucas followed my gaze and gave a small, embarrassed shrug. We are tight this month, Dad. Business is slow in the winter, but do not worry about us. You are safe here. Why, I asked, tears finally spilling over, blurring my vision. Why are you helping me? I kicked you out. I told you never to come back if you chose this life. I treated you like a stranger. Lucas sat back on his heels, taking my hand in his, grease-stained one. He looked at Sarah, then back at me. You are my dad, he said simply. You made mistakes. Sure, you were hard on me. But you are still the man who taught me how to ride a bike. You are the man who carried me when I broke my leg. You closed the door on me, Dad. But we never closed our door on you, not ever. Sarah stepped forward, placing a hand on Lucas' shoulder, smiling down at me vaguely, sad but warm. We do not have much, Harry, she said softly. We were saving this blanket for the baby. But you need it more tonight. We can make do. Looked at the blanket. It was thick and soft, clearly the most expensive thing they owned, probably a gift, and they had given it to a smelly old man without a second thought. I closed my eyes, the shame washing over me hotter than the soup I had spent my life accumulating, millions thinking that wealth was measured in stock options and real estate. But lying there on that lumpy sofa in a drafty garage above the south side, I realized I was the poorest man in the room. And these two struggling to afford instant noodles were the richest people I had ever met. Rest now, Dad, Lucas whispered, tucking the blanket tighter. You are home, home. The word echoed in my mind as I drifted into a fitful sleep, but even as I rested, my subconscious was already planning the next move. I had seen the darkness in my other sons, and now I had seen the light in Lucas, but the test wasn't over. Tomorrow I would push them to the breaking point. I needed to see if this kindness would hold when the pressure of survival truly crushed them. I needed to know if they would sell their souls like their brothers, or if they were truly made of something rare and precious, because what I was about to ask of them would cost them everything they had left. The morning sun filtered through the grimy windows of the small apartment above the garage, casting long beams of dust motes, dancing in the cold air. I woke up to the smell of burnt toast and the sound of hushed whispers coming from the kitchenette. My back ached from the lumpy sofa springs that had dug into my ribs all night. But strangely, it was the best sleep I had in years. There was no hum of expensive air filtration systems, no distant traffic of the Gold Coast, just the quiet stillness of a home built on love and struggle. I lay there for a moment, keeping my eyes closed, pretending to still be asleep, soaking in the warmth of the wool blanket Sarah had sacrificed for me. I wanted to believe that the hard part was over, that I had found my sanctuary, but the reality of poverty is that peace is always temporary and usually expensive. The silence was shattered by a violent pounding on the metal door downstairs. It was not the polite knock of a customer. It was the heavy, authoritative banging of someone who owned the place. The floorboards beneath me vibrated with each blow, and I heard Lucas drop a spoon in the kitchen, cursing under his breath. Stay here, Sarah. Lucas whispered, his voice tight with tension. I will handle it. I heard his heavy boots thudding down the wooden stairs, and I threw off the blanket, creeping to the top of the landing to listen. This was part of the test. I needed to know exactly how deep the water was that my son was treading. The voices drifted up clearly through the thin floorboards. One was Lucas, apologetic and weary. The other was raspy and aggressive, a voice that smelled of cheap cigars and power. 3 months. Lucas, the stranger shouted. 3 months! I have been patient. I have listened to your sob stories about the slow winter and the baby on the way, but my patience is not a currency I can spend at the bank. Mr. Henderson, please, Lucas pleaded. I have a big job coming in next week, a transmission rebuild. It will cover at least half the back rent. Just give me until Friday. Friday. The landlord laughed, a dry, hacking sound. Friday is 2 days away. I do not want half, Lucas. I want all of it. You owe me $4,500. If I do not have cash in hand by 5 o'clock on Friday, I am locking this place up. I am calling the sheriff to evict you from the apartment, and I am seizing everything inside the garage to cover your debt. The lift, the tools, the inventory, all of it. You cannot take my tools. Lucas' voice cracked, desperate. Those are my livelihood. If you take my tools, how am I supposed to pay you back? That is not my problem anymore, Henderson snapped. You have 48 hours, kid. After that, you are out on the street, and take your pregnant wife with you. The metal door slammed shut, shaking the entire building again. Silence returned, heavy and suffocating. I retreated to the sofa, pulling the blanket back up, just as I heard Lucas coming back up the stairs. His steps were slower now, heavier, dragging the weight of the world with them. He walked into the kitchen, and I heard Sarah gasp lightly, clearly seeing the expression on his face. "He is going to evict us, isn't he?" Sarah asked, her voice trembling. Lucas sighed, the sound of a man deflating. "He wants 4,500 by Friday, or he takes the tools." Sarah began to cry, soft, stifled sobs that hurt my heart more than any screaming match ever could. "Oh, God! Lucas, what are we going to do? We have $1,200 in the savings jar." "That is it, and that money was for the hospital deposit." "I know, baby, I know," Lucas murmured, comforting her. "I will figure something out. I will sell the truck. I will work double shifts. We cannot use the hospital money, Lucas." Sarah said, her voice rising slightly in panic. "If we use that money for rent, I cannot deliver. At Mercy General, I will have to go to the county clinic. You know what happened to your cousin there? The infection rates, the overcrowding." Lucas. Scared. "I do not want our baby born in a hallway, because they do not have enough beds." I lay there listening to every word, feeling like a monster. I had millions of dollars sitting in offshore accounts. I could write a check for this building and buy the entire block. Without blinking, yet here was my son choosing between his livelihood and his unborn child's. Safety because of a debt that was less than what I spent on wine last month. The guilt was a physical weight pressing down on my chest, making it hard to breathe, but I could not stop now. If I intervened, if I revealed myself, the lesson would be lost. I needed to know if Lucas would break. I needed to see if the pressure would turn him into his brothers. I waited until the crying subsided into sniffles before I made my move. I let out a groan, a long, guttural sound of pain clutching my chest as I sat up. "Dad." Lucas was at my side. In an instant. His own problems momentarily forgotten, fear replacing the exhaustion in his eyes. "What is it? What is wrong?" My chest. I gasped, squeezing my eyes shut, mimicking the angina attacks I used to watch my own father suffer from. "It feels tight, like a vice. I cannot breathe." "Is it a heart attack?" Sarah asked, rushing over, her face pale, holding a glass of water. "No." I wheezed, acting the part perfectly. "It is my condition. I ran out of my medication yesterday. The stress. The cold. It is triggering an episode. I need my pills. Where are they?" Lucas asked, patting my empty pockets frantically. "We will get them for you. What are they called?" "Vasotec," I lied, naming an expensive heart medication. "I usually keep a supply, but I lost my bag when those kids jumped me. I need a refill. Lucas, or I might not make it through the night." Lucas stood up, instantly grabbing his keys. "I will go to the pharmacy right now." "Do not worry, Dad. We will get it. Do you have your insurance card?" Shook my head, knowing this was the nail in the coffin. "No insurance. I lost coverage when the company went under." "It is all out of pocket." Lucas paused, his hand hovering over his wallet. "How much is it, Dad?" I looked him in the eye, letting the silence hang for a second, before delivering the blow. "It is expensive." "Lucas, without insurance, it is $800 for the emergency dosage." The room went dead silent. $800. I could see the mental math happening behind Lucas' eyes. They had $1,200 total. If he spent $800 on my medicine, they would be left with $400. $400 to fight a $4,500 eviction notice, $400 to pay for a hospital birth. It was impossible. Sarah looked at Lucas, her hand on her stomach. She did not say a word. She did not have to. Her eyes were pleading, screaming the reality of their situation. "We cannot afford this, Lucas. We have to save the baby. We have to save the shop. He is just an old man who abandoned us." Lucas looked at me lying there, gasping for air, his father who had come back into his life only to bring ruin. And then he looked at his wife carrying his future, and then he looked at the eviction notice on the table. I watched his throat bob as he swallowed hard. This was it. This was the moment Preston would have called security. Bradley would have tossed a $20 bill. But Lucas. He took a deep breath, closing his eyes for a second, as if saying a prayer or a goodbye to his dreams. Then he opened them, and they were clear, resolute. "Get the car keys, Sarah," he said, his voice steady. "Lucas," Sarah whispered, a tear sliding down her cheek. "The rent, the baby, we will figure it out," Lucas said firmly, walking over to kiss her forehead. "But I am not letting my father die on this sofa, not over money. We are not them, Sarah. We are not Preston and Bradley. We do not trade lives for dollars." He turned to me, lifting me up with a strength that surprised me. "Let's go, Dad. Let's go. I'm taking you to the pharmacy. Hang in there." As we walked down the stairs, I leaned heavily on him, partly to keep up the act, but mostly because my legs felt weak from the sheer magnitude of what he just did. He was effectively burning his life down to keep me warm. He was choosing a past that had rejected him over a future he had fought for. We got into his battered pickup truck, the engine roaring to life with a struggle. The heater blasted cold air for the first few miles, but Lucas drove with a focus I had never seen. He did not complain. He did not guilt-trip me. He just drove. When we got to the pharmacy, he marched up to the counter and demanded the medication. When the pharmacist told him the total $812, Lucas didn't flinch. He pulled out his wallet, the leather worn and thin. He took out the stack of bills, the money they had likely saved dollar by dollar over months of skipping meals and working overtime. He counted it out onto the counter, his hands shaking. His hands, slightly. It was almost everything he had. "Here," he said, pushing the money forward. "Keep the change." I watched him hand over his safety net, and in return, he got a small orange bottle of pills that were essentially sugar tablets. I had swapped out earlier just in case, but to him, they were life, and he had just bought mine at the highest price imaginable. We walked back to the truck in silence. The medication was in my pocket, but the weight of the sacrifice was in the air. Lucas started the engine, but he didn't pull away immediately. He gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles turning white, and he rested his forehead against his hands. I sat in the passenger seat, clutching the bottle, feeling like the villain in my own story. "Lucas," I said softly, "you didn't have to do that." He lifted his head and looked at me, tears brimming in his eyes, but refusing to fall. "Yes, I did, Dad," he said, his voice rough. "You are family, and as long as I have $1 in my pocket, you are not going to die because you are poor. That is not how Caldwells do things. Or at least that is not how this Caldwell does things." He put the truck in gear and drove us back to the garage, back to the impending eviction, back to the uncertainty. But as we drove through the dark streets of Chicago, I knew one thing for certain. The test was entering its final phase, and tomorrow I would have to break his heart one last time before I could heal it forever, because the sharks were circling, and Preston and Bradley were about to make their move. We returned to the apartment in a heavy silence that screamed louder than any argument could have. Lucas did not sit down. He did not take off his coat. He went straight to the corner of the room where a rug covered a section of the warped wooden floorboards. I watched from the sofa, my heart hammering a rhythm of guilt and awe against my ribs. Sarah stood by the kitchenette, her hands resting protectively on her belly. Her eyes filled with tears she did not shed. She knew what he was doing, and the fact that she did not stop him told me everything I needed to know. About the woman my son had married, Lucas knelt down and pried up a loose floorboard with the edge of a screwdriver deeply concealed in the dust, and insulation was a small velvet box. It was the kind of hiding place people use when they do not trust banks or when they are terrified of losing the last shred of their security. He stood up, brushing the dust off the box, with a tenderness that made my throat tight. He opened it, and the dim light of the apartment caught the sparkle of two objects inside. One was a simple gold band, his wedding ring. The other was a necklace, a delicate silver chain with a sapphire pendant. I stopped breathing for a second. I recognized that necklace. I had bought it for my late wife Eleanor in 1985 for our 20th anniversary. She had worn it every day until she died, and I had given it to Lucas on his 18th birthday, telling him to give it to the woman he loved. It was the only piece of family inheritance I had allowed him to keep when I cut him off. Lucas looked at the items for a long moment, his jaw set tight, fighting a battle between sentiment and survival. He took the ring off his finger, placing it in the box with a clink that sounded like a gunshot in the quiet room. Then he snapped the lid shut. "Have to go out for a bit," Lucas said, his voice steady but hollow. "I know a place that stays open late, Sarah. Watch him, keep him warm, Lucas. Wait," I croaked, feigning weakness but trying to offer him an out. "You do not have to do this." He stopped at the door, looking back at me with a sad smile. "I do have to do this, Dad. You are not dying on my watch, not while I have anything left to trade." He disappeared down the stairs, and a few seconds later I heard the truck engine roar to life. Sarah came over and sat on the edge of the sofa, tucking the blanket around my feet. "He loves that ring," she whispered, staring at the door. "He never takes it off, even when he is working on transmissions. He puts tape over it so it does not get scratched, but he loves you more. Harry." I closed my eyes, unable to face her honesty. I lay there, waiting, counting the minutes, imagining my son driving through the freezing night to sell his heart to save mine. The pawn shop was located 3 miles away, in a strip mall that had seen better decades. The neon sign out front buzzed with a dying flicker reading "Cash for Gold" in aggressive red letters. Inside, the air smelled of stale cigarette smoke and desperation. The walls were lined with the debris of broken dreams, guitars that would never be played again, power tools from failed contractors, and jewelry from marriages that had hit rock bottom. I know this because I had insisted Lucas take me with him, claiming I was too afraid to be left alone. The truth was, I needed to witness the transaction. I needed to see the price of my life. The pawnbroker was a man who looked like he had been carved out of gristle and suspicion. He sat behind a bulletproof glass partition, eyeing Lucas like a vulture, eyes a dying animal. He did not even look at me, slumped in a chair in the corner, clutching my chest. Lucas slid the velvet box through the metal slot. The pawnbroker opened it, his face impassive. He picked up the ring, examining it under a loupe. Then he picked up the necklace, weighing it in his hand, as if it were just scrap metal. "Nice rocks," the pawnbroker grunted, tossing them onto a digital scale. "But the market is down. Gold is soft right now. Silver is practically worthless." Lucas gripped the edge of the counter, his knuckles white. "These are not worthless. The necklace is vintage sapphire. My father bought it 40 years ago. The ring is custom. 18 karat, it is used jewelry, kid," the man spat, chewing on a toothpick. "I do not care about the history. I care about the melt value. I will give you 500 for the lot, 500. Lucas' voice rose, cracking with desperation. "The ring alone cost me 2,000, and the necklace is appraised at 3,000. You are robbing me." The pawnbroker shrugged, leaning back in his chair, taking a slow sip of lukewarm coffee. "Look around you, buddy. It is 11 o'clock at night in a snowstorm. You are not here because you want to browse. You are here because you need cash now. You have got bills or a bookie or a habit. I do not care which, but I am the only game in town right now." Lucas looked back at me. I huddled deeper into my coat, letting out a wheezing cough to remind him of the stakes. He looked back at the broker, agony written all over his face. "I need 800, Lucas said, pleading. 800 covers the medicine, Please, man, it is for my dad. The broker looked at me, his eyes cold and dead. He sighed as if doing us a massive favor, acting annoyed by our very existence. 700, he said, and that is my final offer. May I take it or get out of my shop? Lucas looked at the ring sitting on the cold metal tray. It was the symbol of his marriage, his promise to Sarah. He looked at the necklace, the last connection to his mother. And then he looked at the clock. The pharmacy would close soon. Lucas whispered, his voice defeated. 900, make it 900, and I will never ask you for anything again. Just give me enough to save him. The broker hesitated, calculating the profit he would make, knowing he could sell that necklace for $2,000 tomorrow. He smirked a greasy, triumphant smile. 900. But I am taking a risk here. He counted out the money. $900 in greasy, worn-out $20 bills. He slid them through the slot, along with the empty velvet box. Lucas took the cash, his hands trembling. He did not look back at the jewelry. He could not bear to. He just shoved the money into his pocket and walked over to me, helping me stand up. Let's go, Dad, he said, his voice flat. Dead, we got it. We drove to the pharmacy in silence. The heater in the truck rattled, blowing lukewarm air that did little to combat the chill settling in the cab. Lucas gripped the steering, gripped the schwung wheel so hard I thought it might snap. He had just sold his past and his symbol of the future to buy me a bottle of sugar pills. When we got back to the apartment, Lucas poured a glass of water and handed me the orange bottle. The label read Vasotec, but I knew what was inside. He had paid full price for the placebo I had planted. The receipt sticking out of the bag showed the total $812. He had $12 left from the transaction. $12 to his name here, Dad, Lucas said, forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. The pharmacist said, this should help with the chest pain pretty fast. Drink up, I took the bottle, my hand shaking for real. This time I looked at him, searching for resentment. Searching for regret, I found none. There was only relief that he could help me, Lucas, I said softly. Where did you get the money? You said you were broke. Lucas looked away, busy tidying up the kitchen counter, avoiding my gaze. Oh, I made a few calls. A buddy of mine needed a rush job on a fleet of taxis. He gave me an advance specifically for parts. It is a big order, Dad. It is going to cover us for a while. Do not worry about it. Just get better. He was lying to protect my dignity. He did not want me to know that I was swallowing his wedding ring. He did not want me to feel the burden of his sacrifice. He wanted me to believe that he was successful, that he could provide, that he was a capable son. I popped the pill into my mouth. It tasted like chalk, but it felt like the heaviest thing I had ever swallowed. I drank the water, washing down the guilt along with the pill. Thanks, son, I said, my voice thick with emotion. I feel better already. You get some sleep now, Lucas said, turning off the main light, leaving us in the soft glow of the heater. I have got some work to do downstairs to prep for that big order. He didn't have a big order. He was going downstairs to cry or to scream or to stare at his empty finger and wonder how he was going to tell his landlord on Friday that he had nothing left. As I lay there in the dark, listening to the wind howl outside, I made a vow. The experiment was over. I had my answer. Preston and Bradley had seen a liability. Lucas had seen a father. They saw a balance sheet. He saw a human being. I reached into the lining of my coat, touching the hidden satellite phone I kept there. Tomorrow the game would change. Tomorrow, the beggar billionaire would die, and Harrison Caldwell would return from the grave. And God have mercy on anyone who had stood in my way. Because I certainly would not. I fell asleep with the image of that empty velvet box burned into my retina, imagining the look on the pawnbroker's face when my lawyers would walk in tomorrow to buy the entire strip mall just to get that ring back. But first, there was one final act to play. The climax was approaching, and I needed everyone on stage for the grand finale, including the vultures who thought I was already a corpse. The morning light brought no warmth to the garage, only a gray exposure of the poverty my son was living in, while Lucas was downstairs, working on a transmission, trying to turn a pile of scrap metal into rent money. I was upstairs, weaving the final threads of my trap. I reached into the lining of my coat and pulled out the satellite phone. Again dialing Benedict Stone, my personal attorney and old friend Benedict, answered on the first ring, knowing exactly what time it was. "The stage is set, Benedict," I said, my voice low. "Make the call." 5 minutes later, across town in his glass-walled office, Preston received a call that would change his pulse rate faster than any cardio workout. Benedict played his part to perfection, his voice hushed and urgent. "Preston, I should not be telling you this. It is a breach of attorney-client privilege, but I thought you should know. Your father is not just broke. There is a discrepancy in the old ledgers. I found a trace of a personal emergency fund, an offshore account in the Cayman Islands that the bankruptcy courts missed. It is liquid, Preston, $10 million in bearer bonds, and the access codes are in a physical ledger he keeps in his jacket pocket." I could almost hear Preston salivating through the phone network. $10 million. It was enough to save his reputation, enough to buy his way back into the senator's good graces, but Benedict delivered the hook. "The problem is, Preston, I have reports that his health is failing fast. If he dies without handing over that ledger, the money disappears into the ether forever, and he is currently at that garage in the South Side. If Lucas gets his hands on those codes, well, you know how manipulative the poor can be. The seed was planted, fear and greed, the two most powerful motivators in the human psyche." Preston did not waste a second. He called Bradley immediately, screaming that they had to get to the garage before the old man croaked or before the mechanics stole their inheritance. It did not matter that yesterday they had thrown me out like garbage. Today I was a piñata filled with $10 million, and they were coming to smash me open. I lay back down on the lumpy sofa, pulling the wool blanket up to my chin, waiting. I heard the rumble of engines before I saw them. Not the coughing splutter of neighborhood cars, but the deep, throaty roar of precision, German engineering, a Porsche and a Mercedes tearing through the potholed streets of the South Side, looking as out of place as sharks in a goldfish bowl. I listened as the cars screeched to a halt outside the garage. The silence of the neighborhood was shattered. Doors slammed, aggressive and loud. I could imagine the neighbors peeking out from behind torn curtains, wondering if the mob had come to collect, or if the police were finally raiding the place. But this was worse than the mob. This was family. Preston and Bradley did not knock. They did not respect the sanctity of Lucas' home any more than they respected my dignity. I heard the metal service door downstairs crash open, likely kicked in Lucas. Shout of surprise was drowned out by Preston screaming, "Where is he? Where is the old man?" I closed my eyes, slowing my breathing, mimicking the shallow rattle of the dying. I heard their footsteps thundering up the wooden stairs, shaking the entire structure. They were running or racing each other to the deathbed, not to say goodbye but to rob the corpse. The door to the apartment flew open, banging against the wall. Preston was the first one through. He was wearing a cashmere coat that cost more than Lucas made in a year. His face flushed with the exertion and the manic energy of greed. Bradley was right behind him, eyes darting around the room, scanning for a safe, a bag, a book, anything that looked like money. They saw me lying on the sofa, pale and still. Sarah was standing by the kitchenette, frozen in fear, dropping the towel she was holding. "He is unconscious," Bradley shouted, rushing over, not to check my pulse, but to pat down my coat pockets. "He is out cold." "Check the room, find the ledger," Preston marched over to the sofa looming over me. I kept my eyes shut, but I could smell his cologne. It smelled of desperation. He didn't touch me gently. He grabbed my shoulder and shook me violently, his fingers digging into my collarbone. "Wake up, old man," he yelled, his voice cracking. "Get up, I know you can hear me. Where's the money? Where are the bonds?" I let my head loll to the side, playing the part perfectly, letting out a low groan. "Stop it!" Sarah screamed, rushing forward, pushing at Preston's arm. "You are hurting him. Can't you see he is sick? Leave him alone!" Preston backhanded her away without even looking, shoving a pregnant woman toward the wall. "Shut up, you gold digger. We know what you are doing. You are keeping him here to get him to sign everything over to you." Suddenly a roar erupted from the doorway, a sound of pure primal rage. Lucas had made it up the stairs. He saw his wife stumbling back. He saw his brother shaking his dying father. He saw the vultures picking at the bones before the heart had even stopped beating. "Get your hands off him." Lucas did not look like a mechanic anymore. He looked like a tank. He launched himself across the room, tackling Preston away from the sofa. They crashed into the small table, sending the bowl of instant noodles flying. "Get out!" Lucas roared, standing between me and his brothers, his chest heaving, his fists clenched at his sides. "Get out of my house right now!" Preston scrambled up from the floor, dusting off his expensive coat, his face twisted into a sneer. "Oh, look at the hero protecting his investment. We know about the 10 million, Lucas. We know he has the codes hidden on him. You think you can keep it all for yourself just because you let him sleep on a dirty couch? 10 million. Lucas looked confused, his eyes darting to me, then back to them. "What are you talking about?" "He is broke. He came here with nothing. You threw him out in the snow." "Don't play dumb," Bradley spat, stepping forward, joining Preston. "You are trying to scam us, you and this trashy wife of yours, waiting for him to die so you can cash out." "Well, it is not happening. We are the executors. We are the eldest. That money belongs to the company. It belongs to us." Lucas laughed, a bitter, broken sound. "You guys are insane. You are actually insane. He is dying." The doctor said, "His heart is failing. He needs peace, and you barge in here screaming about imaginary money. You are sick." "Get out before I call the cops. Call them," Preston challenged, puffing out his chest. "By the time they get to this neighborhood, we will have turned this place upside down. Move aside, Lucas, or I will have my lawyers bury you, so deep in lawsuits you will be paying me until your grandchildren are born." Preston stepped forward, raising his hand, as if to shove Lucas again. But Lucas did not budge. He grabbed Preston's wrist mid-air, his grip fortified by years of turning wrenches. Years of manual labor that Preston's soft gym hands could not match. "I said, it out," Lucas growled, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "You touch Schwab, my father again, you touch my wife again, and I do not care who you are, I will break your arm." The room went dead silent. The violence hung in the air, heavy and electric, getting ready to discharge. I opened my eyes, just a sliver, watching. I saw the fear flicker in Preston's eyes. He had never been physically challenged by Lucas before. He was used to bullying him with words, with money, with status. But here in this small room above a garage, status meant nothing. Fine. Preston yanked his arm free, straightening his coat. "You want to play the hard way? Fine. We are not leaving. We are staying right here until he wakes up. And if that ledger is not in my hands by noon, I am bringing a demolition crew to condemn this building. I bought the debt on this place this morning." "Lucas, surprise, I am your new landlord." Lucas' face went pale. The color drained from Sarah's cheeks. Preston smiled a cruel, triumphant shark smile. "That is right, little brother. I own the building now, so technically you are trespassing in my property. Now move aside, and let me search the old man." This was it. The absolute bottom, the depths of their depravity knew no bounds. Preston had not just come for the money. He had bought the debt to enslave his own brother, to hold a roof over their heads as a weapon. I felt a cold fury rising in my chest, a volcanic pressure that threatened to blow my cover right then and there, but I held on. The timing had to be perfect. I needed the witness. I needed the law. The sound of a siren wailed in the distance, getting closer fast. Not a police siren, but the heavy, distinct horn of a luxury motorcade signaling the arrival of the executioner. Lucas stood his ground, refusing to move, shielding me with his body even as his world crumbled around him. "You can take the building." "Preston," he said, tears of frustration welling in his eyes. "You can take the tools, you can take it all, but you are not touching him. You will have to kill me first." Preston stepped forward, a manic glint in his eye. "Maybe I will, just as." He raised his fist, the door downstairs slammed open again, and a booming voice echoed up the stairwell, a voice projected by a megaphone. "This is the Chicago Police Department and the federal marshals. Step away from the occupants and keep your hands where we can see them." Preston and Bradley froze their heads, snapping toward the door. Confusion washed over their faces. Why would the police be here? They hadn't called them. I threw off the blanket, slowly sitting up. The groans of the dying man vanished, replaced by the posture of the CEO, who had crushed unions and competitors for 5 decades. I swung my legs over the edge of the sofa and looked at my 2 eldest sons, my eyes clear and sharp as diamonds. "I do not think they are here for Lucas." "Boys," I said, my voice steady and strong, filling the silence of the room. Preston jumped back as if he had seen a ghost. "Dad, you are awake. You are okay." I stood up, smoothing down my flannel shirt, looking at Lucas, who was staring at me in shock, then at Preston, whose arrogance was melting into terror. "I am better than okay." "Preston," I said, walking past Lucas to stand nose to nose with my eldest son. "I am disappointed, and the police, they are not here to evict anyone. They are here to escort you to a cell. Because stealing $10 million is a crime, but trying to bury your own family, that is a sin, and today is Judgment Day." Preston snapped his fingers, and the 2 men in dark suits who had been waiting on the landing surged forward like trained attack dogs. They were not family, they were hired muscle, the kind of men who did not ask questions. They just removed obstacles, and right now, my youngest son Lucas was the obstacle. The small apartment suddenly felt like a cage. Lucas tried to hold his ground, planting his feet firmly on the warped floorboards, raising his fists in a boxing stance I had taught him when he was 10 years old. But he was exhausted from a night of panic and hunger, and he was outnumbered. "Get him out of the way," Preston ordered, his voice bored and detached as if he were ordering a waiter to clear a table. One of the bodyguards lunged, fainting to the left before driving a heavy shoulder into Lucas' chest. The sound of the impact was sickening, a dull thud of meat hitting meat that made me flinch. Beneath my wool blanket. Lucas stumbled back, crashing into the wall, knocking a framed picture of his wedding day to the floor, the glass shattering instantly. He didn't stay down, though. He roared a sound of pure, desperate frustration and swung a wild haymaker that connected with the guards, jaw snapping the man's head back. For a second, I felt a surge of pride seeing the fire in him, seeing that he would fight giants to protect his home. But the victory was short-lived. The second guard moved in with a baton, striking Lucas hard behind the knee. My son crumpled to the floor with a cry of pain that tore through my heart. He tried to crawl back up, but a heavy boot pinned him to the ground, pressing his face into the dust and the shards of broken glass from his own wedding photo. "Lucas!" Sarah screamed, dropping the towel she had been clutching. She rushed forward, her maternal instinct overriding her fear, needing to get to her husband, needing to shield him, but she never made it. Bradley, my second son, the one who claimed to be a man of culture and sophistication, stepped into her path. He did not look at her as a sister-in-law or as a pregnant woman carrying his niece or nephew. He looked at her as a nuisance. He extended his arm and shoved her hard, not a gentle push, but a violent dismissal intended to knock her away. Sarah lost her footing on the slick floor, and for a terrifying heartbeat time seemed to suspend. I watched in horror as she flailed backward, her hands instinctively going to her belly to protect the life inside. She collided with the edge of the kitchen counter with a sharp gasp, before sliding down to the floor, landing heavily on her hip. "No!" Lucas screamed from the floor, struggling uselessly against the weight of the bodyguard. "You coward! You touched her! I will kill you, Bradley! I swear to God I will kill you!" Bradley just dusted off his jacket, looking down at Sarah with a sneer of pure contempt. She is fine, stop being dramatic, she just slipped. He looked at Preston seeking approval for his cruelty, like a child seeking praise for a bad deed. I lay there, my fingernails digging into the palms of my hands so hard I drew blood. The urge to throw off the blanket and tear them apart with my bare hands was overwhelming. My blood pressure was spiking, my vision turning red at the edges, witnessing this violation of everything I had ever taught them about honor, about protecting the weak. But I forced myself to stay frozen. I needed the timeline to align perfectly. I needed the trap to snap shut. Not just on their fingers, but on their entire lives. Bradley stepped over Lucas, casually kicking his leg as he passed, walking into the center of the room. He looked around the small apartment, his eyes scanning the peeling paint, the mismatched furniture, the water stains on the ceiling. With a look of amusement, he laughed, a cold, dry sound that lacked any real humor. "You are so stupid, Lucas," Bradley said, shaking his head. "Look at this place. You are fighting us for what? For the right to live in a dump." He kicked a stack of baby clothes that Sarah had folded neatly on a chair, sending them scattering across the dirty floor. "You actually believe the old man has $10 million hidden in a bond ledger? You really are gullible, aren't you?" Lucas groaned from the floor, his face pressed against the wood. "Why are you here then? If there is no money, why are you breaking into my house?" Bradley crouched down, picking up a ceramic vase from the table, examining it before dropping it deliberately. It shattered into a dozen pieces, and he smiled. "Because we are thorough, little brother, and because I know our father better than you do. He might not have 10 million, but he never went anywhere without that vintage Rolex, the gold Daytona with the green dial. It is worth 50 grand, easy. And I know he didn't sell it. He is too sentimental. I bet you hid it, didn't you? You pawed through his pockets while he was sleeping and hid it in your little stash. There is no Rolex." Lucas spat blood dripping from his lip. "He sold it years ago to pay for Mom's medical bills." "You would know that if you ever visited her in the hospital, liar," Bradley shouted, standing up and flipping the kitchen table over with a crash, bowls and spoons flying everywhere. "Tear this place apart. Find the watch, find the cash, find anything we can liquidate." The chaos that followed was a symphony of destruction. Preston stood by the door, watching like a general, while Bradley and the second bodyguard began to ransack the apartment. They pulled drawers out of the dresser, dumping their contents on the floor, ripping through Lucas' meager clothes, looking for a treasure that didn't exist. They tore the cushions off the sofa where I lay, forcing me to curl up tighter, to avoid being tossed aside. They smashed the few plates in the cabinets, looking for hollow spaces behind the walls. It was not just a search. It was a punishment. They were punishing Lucas for being poor, for being different, for daring to stand up to them. They wanted to leave him with nothing, not even his dignity. I watched through half-closed eyes as Bradley picked up a small wooden box from the shelf. It was a jewelry box hand-carved by Lucas. He shook it, hearing nothing, and threw it against the wall, splitting it open. I felt a tear slide down my temple, hot and stinging. It was not a tear of sadness anymore. It was a tear of finality. I was watching the funeral of my family. The sons I had raised were dead, replaced by these monsters, consumed by greed, and the only son I had rejected was the only one showing any humanity, bleeding on the floor to protect a father who had abandoned him. I shifted my gaze to the old clock on the wall. The second hand was sweeping past the 12. It was 9:59 in the morning. The destruction around me was reaching a crescendo. Bradley was now ripping up the floorboards near the corner, convinced there was a safe underneath. "Where is it?" Bradley screamed, his face red and sweaty. "Tell me where you hid it, or I will have them break your fingers." "One by one, I will never tell you anything." Lucas gasped, struggling for air, even though he knew nothing. He was protecting a secret he didn't even understand, simply because he thought it mattered to me. 10 o'clock, the hour struck. Not with a chime, but with a sound from outside that cut through the noise of the smashing furniture. It was not the high-pitched wail of a police siren. It was deeper, louder, a rhythmic thrumming that vibrated in the chest. It was the sound of heavy engines, precision-tuned and powerful, approaching in formation. Preston turned his head toward the window. Frowning, "What is that?" The sound grew louder, accompanied by the screech of heavy tires on asphalt and the slamming of multiple heavy doors. It sounded like an army had arrived. The bodyguards stopped their destruction, looking at Preston for instructions. Bradley froze, holding a broken lamp in his hand. "Is that the cops? Did you call the cops?" Preston moved to the window, peering through the grime-covered glass into the street below. His face went slack, his jaw dropping open in genuine confusion. "That is not the police," he whispered. That is a motorcade." "A motorcade?" Bradley asked, running to the window, dropping the lamp. "Black SUVs, limousines, flags. Who the hell is coming here?" "The president." I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the dusty air of the room. The pain in my chest was gone, replaced by a cold iron resolve. I reached under the blanket and gripped the handle of the cane I had hidden there, not because I needed it to walk, but because I needed a weapon of authority. It was time the play was over. The curtain was coming down, and the reviews were going to be devastating. I sat up slowly, the blanket sliding off my shoulders, revealing not the frail old man they thought was dying, but the man who had built an empire from steel and grit. "It is not the President, Bradley," I said, my voice cutting through the silence of the room, clear and commanding. They all spun around, staring at me as if a corpse had just sat up in a coffin. Even Lucas looked up from the floor, his eyes wide with shock. "It is the board of directors." "Oh!" Continued, swinging my legs over the edge of the sofa and standing up to my full height, smoothing down the front of my flannel shirt. "And they are here to witness the hostile takeover of your lives." Preston looked from me to the window, then back to me, fear dawning in his eyes as the heavy footsteps of my personal security team thundered up the stairs, answering the call of the siren. The door burst open, not kicked in this time, but opened with precision, and 5 men in tactical suits with earpieces flooded the room. Weapons drawn but pointed directly at the bodyguards. "Drop it!" the lead agent shouted, his voice booming. The bodyguards dropped Lucas and backed away, hands in the air, realizing instantly they were outgunned. I walked over to Lucas, extending a hand to help him up. He took it, his grip bloody but strong. I pulled him to his feet and then turned to face Preston and Bradley, who were now backed against the wall, trembling. "You wanted a show, boys," I said, my voice low and dangerous. "You wanted to see what I was worth. Well, look out the window. The convoy outside is worth more than everything you own combined. And the man standing in front of you is about to foreclose on your future." The heavy boots of the tactical team had silenced the room, but it was the arrival of the man in the pinstripe suit that truly sucked the oxygen out of the air. Benedict Stone walked through the shattered doorway, stepping over the broken remains of Lucas' wedding photo, with the grace of a man who owned the pavement beneath his feet. He was flanked by 4 more men, but these were not police officers. They were corporate security, the kind that guarded nuclear secrets and vault codes. Benedict adjusted his silk tie, his expression unreadable behind his wire-rimmed glasses, and scanned the room. His eyes resting briefly on Lucas, bleeding lip, before shifting to Preston. Preston let out a breath that was half laugh and half sob, relief washing over his sweaty face. He straightened his coat, trying to regain the composure of a CEO, even though he was currently standing in a trashed apartment in the South Side. "Benedict," he stammered, stepping forward, ignoring the laser sights of the security team. "Thank God you are here. These maniacs, these people, they have kidnapped my father. They are holding him hostage, trying to coerce him into changing the will. You need to document this. You see the violence, you see the instability." Benedict said nothing. He simply placed his leather briefcase on the only table that hadn't been overturned, clicking the latches open with a sound that echoed like a judge's gavel. Preston took this silence as agreement. He puffed out his chest, pointing a shaking finger at Lucas. I want you to draft the papers right now, Benedict. A full disinheritance clause. Cut Lucas out completely. I want a restraining order. I want him arrested for elder abuse, and ensure that the assets, the 10 million in bonds, are transferred to my custody immediately for safekeeping. My father is clearly not in his right mind. He is senile. He is vulnerable. I watched Preston dig his own grave with every word. He was so blinded by greed, so convinced of his own superiority, that he couldn't see the trap closing around his neck. He actually thought Benedict worked for him. He forgot that Benedict had been my shadow for 40 years, that we had fought legal wars together, that made this family squabble look like a playground fight. Benedict finally looked up from his briefcase, holding a single thick document. He didn't look at Preston. He looked at me, Mr. Caldwell. The lawyer said, his voice calm and professional. The papers are ready for execution, as we discussed last week. Preston frowned, looking between the lawyer and me last week. What are you talking about? Dad has been missing for 2 days. He has been delirious. I decided it was time to end the charade once and for all. I took a step forward, the floorboards creaking under my boots. I didn't need the cane anymore. I didn't need the stoop. I straightened my spine, feeling the vertebrae click into place, standing to my full 6'2" height. The transformation was physical, but it was also psychological. The air of the helpless old beggar evaporated, replaced by the aura of the man who had built a logistics empire from the ground up. There is no need to draft any new papers, Preston, I said, my voice dropping the rasp and returning to the deep baritone that had commanded boardrooms for decades. The paperwork was finalized 7 days ago. Before I even put on this coat. Before I even walked out the door. Preston and Bradley took a synchronized step back, their eyes widening in genuine confusion. They looked at the man standing before them, and for the first time they didn't see a victim, they saw a predator. You are not sick, Bradley whispered, his voice trembling. You are standing up, you are not dying. Laughed a short, sharp sound. I am 75, Bradley. I have arthritis and I need reading glasses, but dying hardly. The heart attack, the angina. It was all theater. The pills Lucas bought with his wedding ring were sugar tablets. And the doctor who called you with the grim prognosis, he is an actor I hired from the local theater guild. Preston's face went from pale to a deep, blotchy red. You lied to us, you manipulated us, you made us think you were dead just to what? To play a sick game, to conduct an audit. I cut him off, my voice rising, shaking the dust from the ceiling. I needed to know the true value of my assets. And I am not talking about trucks or warehouses, Preston. I am talking about you. I am talking about my blood. I wanted to know what would happen when the money ran out, when I was no longer the bank of Dad, but just a burden. And you failed. I pointed at the destruction around the room, at Sarah cowering in the corner, at Lucas bleeding on the floor. You failed spectacularly. You didn't just fail, you proved yourselves to be morally bankrupt. But I am not finished yet. I reached into the pocket of my flannel shirt and pulled out my smartphone. It was a stark contrast to the poverty I was dressed in, a symbol of the power I still held. I tapped the screen and held it up. The display showed a call connecting to the private banking division of Chase Morgan. Preston saw the number and his knees actually buckled. Dad. Wait, what are you doing? Press the speakerphone button. The line rang once before a crisp, professional voice answered. Mr. Caldwell, good morning. We have been expecting your call. Execute protocol. Omega, I said, staring directly into Preston's terrified eyes. Protocol Omega, Preston screamed, lurching forward. Dad, no, you cannot do that. That is the nuclear option. The voice on the phone didn't hesitate. Understood, Mr. Caldwell, freezings all assets associated with Preston, Caldwell, and Bradley. Caldwell immediately, flagging all accounts for forensic accounting review regarding suspected embezzlement and money laundering. We are notifying the SEC and the IRS as we speak. The credit lines are being severed now, no. Bradley shrieked, pulling out his own phone, tapping frantically at his banking app. My margins. The call. I need that liquidity. You are destroying me. I watched as Bradley's face crumbled, looking at his screen. The notifications were already rolling in. Account suspended, card. Declined assets, frozen. The digital empire he had built on leverage, and my money was vanishing in real time. You destroyed yourselves, I said coldly. You thought you could strip me bare. You thought you could pick my bones clean while I was still warm. Well, welcome to the real world, boys. In the real world, you do not get to inherit what you did not earn, and you certainly do not get to keep what you tried to steal. Lucas stood up slowly, wiping the blood from his mouth. Looking from me to his brothers, he didn't look happy. He looked sad. He looked like a man watching a tragedy he couldn't stop, Dad. Lucas said softly, You do not have to ruin them. I turned to my youngest son, the only one who had passed the test. They ruined themselves. Son, I am just processing the paperwork. Now, Benedict, show them the rest. Show them what they really lost today. Benedict handed me the thick manila envelopes, and I felt the weight of them in my hands, heavier than any brick I had ever carried on a construction site back in the early days. These were not just papers. They were the autopsy reports of my son's morality. I walked over to the workbench, which was covered in grease and scattered tools, and I threw the files down. The sound they made hitting the oil-stained wood was dull and final, like a coffin lid closing, putting an end to the noise and the chaos in the room. Preston and Bradley flinched at the sound, their eyes locked on the documents, knowing instinctively that their secrets had been excavated. I opened the first folder, revealing a series of bank transfers and photographs taken by private investigators. I picked up a photo of a woman getting into a Ferrari and held it up for Preston to see. She was young, beautiful, and she was definitely not his wife, Tiffany. You call yourself a CEO, Preston? I said, my voice slicing through the air like a cold wind. But you are nothing more than a thief. I have the forensic accounting right here. You diverted $5 million from the company pension fund, the fund meant for our truck drivers, for the men and women who break their backs for us, and you used it to buy a penthouse in Miami for your mistress. Preston's face turned a shade of gray I had never seen before. He opened his mouth to speak, to deny it, but I cut him off, tossing a spreadsheet onto the pile. Do not bother lying. The paper trail is irrefutable. You forged my signature on the authorization forms. You betrayed the people who trusted you to feed your own lust, and now the FBI is looking at these same numbers, wondering why a logistics company is funding a luxury lifestyle in South Beach. I turned to Bradley, who was shaking so hard his teeth were actually chattering. I picked up the second file, throwing it at his feet. It slid across the floor, stopping against his polished shoe. And you, the financial wizard, I sneered. You told me you were trading stocks, but you were washing dirty money for the cartels through cryptocurrency exchanges. We tracked the wallets, Bradley. We know about the $9 million you laundered last month alone. You are not a trader. You are a criminal accomplice. The feds are not just coming for your money. They are coming for your freedom. And unlike me, the cartel does not forgive debts. The silence that followed was absolute, broken only by the sound of sirens getting louder. Outside, real police sirens, this time mixing with the hum of the corporate convoy. It was the soundtrack of their destruction. The transformation in my sons was immediate and pathetic. The arrogance, the posturing, the cruelty. It all evaporated, leaving behind two terrified children who had been caught with their hands in the jar. But this jar was full of vipers. Preston was the first to crumble. He dropped to his knees, right there on the dirty floor of the garage, ruining his suit. In the grime he so despised Dad. Please, he sobbed, reaching out to grab my pant leg, his hands shaking. You have to stop them. You can call Benedict off. You can fix this. It was a mistake. I was going to pay it back. I swear, I was just borrowing it. The market turned against me. I did not mean to hurt the company. Bradley fell down beside him, clutching his head in his hands, rocking back and forth, terror in his eyes. Dad, they will kill me. If I go to prison, the gangs will kill me. You have to help me. I am your son. You cannot let them take me. I did it for the family. I wanted to prove I could make big money like you. I looked down at them, feeling a profound sense of nausea. These were the men who yesterday had looked at me shivering in the snow and told me to die because I was bad for their image. Now they were begging for the very compassion they had refused to give. It is funny, I said, my voice low and devoid of warmth. Yesterday, when I begged for a place to sleep, you told me to get out. You told me I was a liability. Now you want me to be your savior. Suddenly, a shrill voice cut through their sobbing. Tiffany Preston's wife stepped forward. Her face was twisted, not with fear for her husband, but with self-preservation. She looked at Preston kneeling on the floor with pure disgust. I did not know. She screamed, pointing a manicured finger at him. I did not know about the embezzlement. Harry? You have to believe me. He lied to me too, and a mistress. He has a mistress. While I am planning his charity galas, she turned to me, her eyes wide and pleading, trying to distance herself from the sinking ship. Harry, I am a victim here too. I am the mother of your grandchildren. You cannot let me go down with him. I had nothing to do with the fraud. I want a divorce. I am filing for divorce right now. Preston looked up at her. Betrayal written all over his face. Tiffany, how can you say that? You spent the money. You have the jewelry, the cars. Shut up, she shrieked, kicking at him with her heel. You are a loser, Preston, a lying, cheating loser. I am not going to jail because you are incompetent. Harry, please tell the police I am innocent. I watched them turn on each other like rats in a barrel. It was the final confirmation I needed. Their loyalty was transactional. Their love was conditional. They were not a family. They were a corporation of greed, and now that the bankruptcy was here, they were liquidating each other. Enough, I roared the word, echoing off the metal walls, silencing their bickering. I stepped back, creating a physical distance between myself and the wreckage of my lineage. I looked at Lucas, who was standing by the window holding Sarah, doing his best to shield her from this ugliness. He looked sad, not triumphant, just sad. That was the difference. I looked back at Preston and Bradley and Tiffany kneeling in the dirt. You three, I said, my voice steady, carrying the weight of a judge passing sentence. You made a fatal miscalculation. You thought that because I gave you access to wealth that you owned it. You thought the mansions, the cars, the credit cards belonged to you. You forgot who signed the checks. I signaled to Benedict, who opened his briefcase again, pulling out a single document stamped with a red seal. You kicked me out onto the street because you thought I was poor, I said, allowing a small, cold smile to touch my lips. You thought I had lost control of my assets, but you forgot about the structure of the estate. Everything you have, every house you live in, every car you drive, every dollar in your trust accounts is held in a revocable living trust. Preston's eyes widened, the legal term hitting him like a physical blow. No. Dad. You cannot. I can. And I have, I continued. The trust stipulates that the beneficiaries must maintain a code of conduct, moral standing, and legal integrity by engaging in felony embezzlement and money laundering. You have violated every clause in the agreement. I took the document from Benedict and held it up. As of this morning at 9 a.m., I signed the revocation order. I have dissolved your trusts. I have repossessed the properties. The Lake Forest Mansion, Preston, belongs to the trust. The penthouse, Bradley, belongs to the trust. Even the jewelry you are wearing, Tiffany, belongs to the trust. I leaned in close so they could see the fire in my eyes. You wanted me to know what it feels like to be homeless. Well, congratulations. As of this moment, you are trespassing on my property. The clothes on your backs are the only things you own, and since you like the cold so much, you can experience it firsthand. The locks on your homes have already been changed. The security codes have been wiped. You have nothing." They stared at me in stunned silence, the magnitude of their loss crashing down on them. They were not just going to jail. They were going to jail as paupers. They had lost the safety net. They had abused for 40 years. I turned to the tactical team. "Escort them out," I said, dismissing them as if they were strangers waiting for a meeting. "The police are waiting downstairs. Hand them over to the FBI. And make sure they do not take anything that belongs to me." As the security guards hauled them to their feet, weeping and screaming excuses, I felt a part of me die. The part that was a father to them, but another part of me, the part that demanded justice, felt a clean, cold relief. I had cut out the cancer. It hurt, but it was necessary to save the body. I watched them being dragged down the stairs, the same stairs they had stormed up only minutes before, thinking they were kings. I listened until their wails faded, replaced by the Miranda rights being read by the officers outside. Then I turned to the only two people left in the room, Lucas and Sarah, who were staring at me with wide disbelief, wondering if the hammer was about to fall on them too. But I had a different kind of judgment for them. The garage fell into a sudden, heavy silence, broken only by the rhythmic flashing of red and blue lights bouncing off the peeling paint of the walls. The FBI agents moved with a clinical efficiency that was terrifying to watch. They didn't shout. They didn't run. They simply boxed my sons in, leaving them no room to escape, physically or legally. Preston was still weeping, a broken man who had realized too late that money was not a shield against consequences. Bradley was hyperventilating, his eyes darting around as the handcuffs clicked onto his wrists, the metal sound echoing like a gunshot. In the small room I watched them go, and I felt a strange hollowness in my chest. It was not regret exactly, because I knew this had to happen, but it was a deep mourning for the potential they had wasted. I watched the officers guide them down the stairs, the same stairs they had stomped up with such arrogance only an hour ago. I listened to their footsteps fade away, followed by the slamming of heavy car doors and the screech of tires as the convoy pulled away, taking the toxicity out of my life and out of this building. Tiffany had tried to follow them, screaming about her rights and her innocence, but an agent had blocked her path, handing her a subpoena. Instead, telling her not to leave the state, she collapsed onto the floor, sobbing. Not for her husband, but for her social standing. Realizing that her life of galas and country clubs was over finally, she gathered herself and ran out into the snow, escaping the scene of her humiliation, leaving us alone in the wreckage of the apartment. The quiet that followed was profound. It was the kind of silence that comes after a violent storm, when the wind dies down, and you are left surveying the damage. Lucas was standing in the middle of the room, his chest heaving, his lips split and bleeding, his mechanic jumpsuit torn at the shoulder. Sarah was still in the corner, clutching her belly, her eyes wide with shock and confusion. They looked at me, but they didn't move toward me. They didn't know who I was anymore. Yesterday, I was their helpless father. Today, I was a titan who had just crushed his own children with a phone call. I walked over to the window and watched the last of the police cars disappear around the corner. Then I turned back to them, the mask of the billionaire slipping back into the face of a father. Lucas looked at me warily, and I could see the question burning in his eyes. He was wondering if he was next, if this was all just a game to me, and he was just another pawn to be moved or discarded. I sighed, letting the exhaustion finally show on my face. "I am sorry you had to see that, Lucas," I said, my voice soft, breaking the tension. "I never wanted it to come to this. I gave them every chance to be decent men, every chance to show just an ounce of humanity, but they chose their path." Lucas swallowed hard, wiping the blood from his mouth with the back of his hand. You really sent them to prison. Dad, you really did it. They sent themselves. Lucas, I corrected, stepping carefully over the broken glass of his wedding photo. I just stopped protecting them from the consequences of their actions. There is a difference. I signaled to Benedict, who was standing quietly by the door holding a small black velvet box. Benedict walked over and placed it in my hand, giving me a nod of respect before stepping back. I looked at the box, feeling the texture of the velvet under my thumb. It was small, but it carried more weight than the thick legal files I had thrown at Preston. I walked up to Lucas and Sarah, stopping just a few feet away. I looked at Lucas's hands, hands that were stained with grease and oil, hands that worked hard every single day to put food on the table, hands that had sold their most precious possession to save a dying old man. "Give me your hand, son," I said gently. Lucas hesitated for a second, then slowly reached out. I took his hand, turning it over, palm up, exposing the pale strip of skin on his ring finger where his wedding band used to be. The sight of it made my throat tighten again. "You made a choice last night, Lucas," I said, looking him in the eye. "You chose to sacrifice the symbol of your love to save my life. You walked into that pawn shop and let a shark rob you blind because you thought I was worth it." I opened the velvet box. The light in the room seemed to catch the object inside, making it flare with a brilliance that made Sarah gasp. Sitting there on black velvet was Lucas's gold wedding band, the one he had sold for $900. But next to it, welded seamlessly into the gold setting, was a diamond, a massive, flawless 5-carat diamond that shimmered with an inner fire. "I went back to the pawn shop 10 minutes after you left," I explained. "My security team paid the broker a visit. We didn't just get the ring back, we had a little chat about fair business practices." I took the ring out of the box and pressed it into Lucas's palm. "Had a jeweler friend of mine work on this." "Overnight," I continued, "this is not just a ring anymore, Lucas. It is a medal. It is a medal of honor for the only man I know who understands the true value of loyalty. I had the diamond set into the band to remind you that pressure doesn't break you, son. Pressure is what turns coal into diamonds. And you are the toughest diamond I have ever seen." Lucas stared down at the ring, his mouth opening and closing, unable to find the words. Tears spilled over his lashes, tracking through the grime on his face. Sarah covered her mouth, crying softly, looking at the ring that was now worth more than the entire building they lived in. Lucas choked out, looking up at me. "You didn't have to. This is too much." "It is not enough," I said, shaking my head. "It is nowhere near enough for what you did." I turned to Benedict again, and this time the lawyer stepped forward, clearing his throat, opening a leather-bound portfolio that contained a single pristine document. The paper was thick, cream-colored, and stamped with the official seal of the Caldwell Corporation. Benedict adjusted his glasses, looking from me to Lucas, his expression solemn, but with a hint of a smile at the corner of his lips. "Mr. Lucas Caldwell, Mrs. Sarah Caldwell." Benedict began, his voice filling the small room, formal and precise, acting under the direct instruction of Mr. Harrison Caldwell, and in accordance with the revocation of the previous family trusts. I am here to read the terms of the new living will and immediate asset transfer. Effective as of this morning. Lucas looked at me, panic flickering in his eyes. "Asset transfer, Dad. We do not need money. We are fine. We can work." "Just listen, Lucas," I said, putting a hand on his shoulder, forcing him to stay still. "Just listen." Benedict continued, ignoring the interruption. "The document states that due to the gross misconduct of the former beneficiaries, Preston and Bradley Caldwell, they have been permanently removed from the line of succession. Therefore, the entirety of the Caldwell estate, including all liquid assets, real estate holdings, and the controlling interest in Caldwell Logistics, is hereby transferred to the sole remaining beneficiary." Benedict paused, letting the words hang in the air for a second, before delivering the number. "Mr. Lucas Caldwell, you are now the owner of 100% of the shares of Caldwell Logistics. The current market valuation of the corporation, after this morning's trading, is $58 million. $58 million. The number didn't even sound real. It sounded like a number from a movie or a dream. Sarah let out a small squeak, her legs giving out as she sat down hard on the sofa. Lucas went pale, paler than he had been when the bodyguards were beating him. He looked at me, his eyes wide with shock, shaking his head slowly. "Oh," he whispered, "Oh, Dad, I cannot. I am a mechanic. I fix cars. I do not know how to run a company. I cannot take $58 million. You are not just a mechanic." "Lucas," I said, my voice firm. "You are a Caldwell, and you have something your brothers never had. You have a heart. You can hire people to do the math, son. You can hire people to manage the trucks, but you cannot hire someone to have a conscience. You are the only one I trust to lead this company into the future. You are the only one who will treat the workers like human beings because you know what it is like to be one." Lucas looked at the document in Benedict's hand as if it were a bomb. $58 million. It was enough to buy the whole neighborhood. It was enough to change the world. "And there is one more thing," Benedict added, turning the page, looking around the destroyed apartment, looking at the water stains on the ceiling, regarding this property, the garage and the apartment above it. Lucas looked up, protective instinct kicking in again. Wait, we paid the rent, Dad. You paid the rent. This is our home. You cannot take this." I stepped in, walking over to the window, looking out at the snowy street, at the dilapidated buildings of the South Side. "We are not keeping this place, Lucas," I said, turning back to him. "I bought the debt on this building this morning just before Preston arrived. I own it now." Lucas looked crushed. "Dad, please, I know it is a dump, but it is ours. We brought our first baby home here. Well, we will bring the baby home here." "No, you won't," I said, cutting him off. My voice was stern, but my eyes were smiling. "You won't bring my grandson home to a drafty apartment above a garage. I am ordering the immediate demolition of this building. Demolition." Lucas gasped. "But we are tearing it down," I said, walking over to Sarah and helping her stand up. "And on this lot, we are going to build a state-of-the-art community center and a free maternity hospital for the women of the South Side. And we are going to name it the Eleanor Caldwell Center after your mother, Sarah." Burst into fresh tears. Burying her face in her hands, Lucas looked at me, and for the first time the shock gave way to a smile that broke through the pain and the blood and the years of estrangement. "You are going to build a hospital?" he asked, his voice trembling. "We are going to build a hospital," I corrected, putting my arms around both of them. "And you are going to run the foundation that pays for it. You are done fixing cars, Lucas. It is time to start fixing lives." I held them close, my son and my daughter-in-law, feeling the warmth of their gratitude washing away the cold of the last 2 days. I had lost 2 sons to greed, but I had found the one who mattered. And as I stood there, in that broken down apartment, holding a $58 million family in my arms, I knew that the beggar billionaire was the richest man in the world, not because of the check, but because of the people standing beside him. The police sirens had faded completely, now replaced by the sound of the wind outside, but inside it was warm. Finally, it was warm. 30 days is a short time in the grand scheme of a life, but it is long enough to rewrite a destiny completely. The glass-walled boardroom of Caldwell Logistics was usually a place of shouting matches and ego battles, a Shark Tank where Preston used to pace back and forth, screaming about profit margins and cutting corners. But today, the room was quiet, not the silence of fear, but the silence of respect. Lucas sat at the head of the long mahogany table wearing a navy blue suit that I had bought him. It fit him perfectly, but he still looked at his hands, occasionally as if surprised to see them clean of grease and oil. He didn't look comfortable in the leather chair yet, but he looked commanding in a way his brothers never did, because he wasn't trying to be the smartest person in the room. He was trying to be the most decent. I sat in the corner, quietly observing my retirement. Finally official, Lucas was addressing the board of directors, men and women who had initially been skeptical about a mechanic taking over a Fortune 500 company. But in just 4 weeks, Lucas had won them over, not with spreadsheets, but with character. He had already reinstated the pension fund that Preston had raided. He had approved a 10% raise for the long haul, drivers paying for it by slashing the executive bonus packages, including his own. And right now he was listening intently to the head of human resources discussing maternity leave policies. We need to do better than the minimum. Lucas said, his voice steady. We are a family company, and that means we take care of families, extending full pay for 6 months for all new parents, effective immediately. The room murmured in agreement, watching him with a mix of awe and relief simply because he led with empathy. The ghost of his brother's greed had been exorcised from the building, replaced by the spirit of hard work that I had founded this place on 50 years ago. While Lucas was building a future 5 miles away in Grant Park, my other 2 sons were confronting their past. The wind off Lake Michigan was still biting cold, a cruel reminder of the night they had left me to freeze. But today I was warm, and they were the ones shivering. The court had been swift and merciless given the amount of evidence Benedict had compiled. The judge denied bail citing flight risk and ordered them to perform community service while awaiting final sentencing, which was looking like 10 to 15 years. In federal prison. Preston and Bradley were wearing bright orange vests over gray jumpsuits aimed at humiliating them, as much as identifying them. They were walking along the walking path, holding trash pickers and plastic bags stabbing at discarded wrappers and cigarette butts. Passers-by stopped to stare, some recognizing the fallen princes of Chicago, whispering behind their hands and pointing phones to record the spectacle. Preston looked aged 10 years in a month. His hair was graying at the temples without his stylist, and his face was gaunt. He stabbed at a soda can, missing it twice, cursing under his breath, blaming the wind, blaming the judge, blaming everyone but himself. Beside him, Bradley looked catatonic, moving like a robot. His eyes dead. He had lost more than money. He had lost his identity without the adrenaline of the trading floor, without the validation of his sycophants. He was just a man in an orange vest, picking up garbage. "This is ridiculous," Preston muttered loud enough for the supervising officer to glare at him. "I am a CEO. I should be in a boardroom, not cleaning up after tourists. It is a mistake. My lawyers will fix this." Bradley stopped, looking at his brother with a sudden flash of the old anger. "It is not a mistake." Preston. "We are here because of you. Because you had to steal from the pension. Because you had to treat Dad like an animal. Just shut up and pick up the trash." The officer blew a whistle, shouting at them to keep moving, calling them by their inmate numbers instead of their names. Losing their names was the first step of their punishment. And as I watched the footage later on the news, I felt a pang of sadness, but no regret. They were learning the lesson. I should have taught them when they were 6 years old that actions have consequences, and that dignity is earned through labor, not inherited through blood. But my mind did not dwell on them for long. I had better things to focus on. I was sitting in the garden of the new estate. I had bought a smaller place closer to the city and closer to the site where the Eleanor Caldwell Center was breaking ground. The daffodils were just starting to push through the soil, signaling the arrival of spring and the end of the long, dark winter. In my arms, wrapped in a soft blue blanket, was the newest heir to the Caldwell legacy. Lucas and Sarah had named him Harry, not Harrison, just Harry, honoring me, but giving him his own identity. He was only 2 weeks old, a tiny bundle of warmth and innocence sleeping soundly against my chest, unaware of the storm his family had just weathered. I looked down at his small face, tracing the curve of his cheek with my thumb. This was it. This was the true wealth I had spent 50 years chasing, the wrong things. Thinking that legacy was about buildings with my name on them or trucks rolling down the highway. But looking at this child, I realized that legacy is what you leave in the hearts of the people you raise. It is the values you instill, not the valuables you bequeath. Lucas walked out onto the patio, loosening his tie, looking tired but happy. He sat down next to me, watching his son sleep. "He looks peaceful," Lucas said softly. "He is safe," I replied, rocking the baby gently. "He will never know the hunger we felt, Lucas. He will never know the cold, But we have to make sure he knows the value of things, not just the price. We have to teach him that kindness is a strength, not a weakness. Lucas nodded, leaning back, closing his eyes. I am trying, Dad. The company. It is a lot. But the guys, the mechanics, the drivers, they are looking at me differently now. They trust me because you are one of them, I said. You always were. That is why you are going to be a better CEO than I ever was. I built the empire with iron. You are going to sustain it with heart. The moment was perfect, a tableau of redemption and peace, 3 generations of Caldwell men sitting in the sun. The cycle of trauma broken by the courage of one mechanic who sold his wedding ring. Then the phone on the glass table buzzed. It was my personal cell, the number only family knew. I glanced at the screen and saw the caller ID. It was a collect call from the Cook County Correctional Facility. Lucas opened his eyes, seeing the screen. He tensed up, the peace shattering instantly. It is them, he said quietly. Do you want me to decline it? I looked at the phone, watching it vibrate, dancing across the glass. I thought about Preston in his orange vest, shivering in the park. I thought about the years of manipulation, the lies, the sheer cruelty of that night at the Drake Hotel. And then I looked at baby Harry sleeping in my arms. No, I said, picking up the phone. I pressed the accept button and put it on speaker, setting it back down. There was a crackle of static, and then Preston's voice filled the air, frantic and desperate. Dad! Dad, are you there? Thank God. Look, you have to help us. It is freezing out here. The work detail is inhumane, and the lawyer says they are going to transfer us to maximum security pending the trial, Dad. Please, I am sorry, okay, I said. I was sorry, you made your point. Send the bail money. Put up the bond. We can fight this from the outside. I am your son, Dad. You cannot let me rot in here. I listened to his voice, expecting to feel anger, expecting to feel that old pull of parental guilt. But I felt nothing. It was like listening to a telemarketer or a stranger on the bus. The cord had been cut, not by me, but by him on the night he poured wine on my chest and threw me into the snow. Dad Bradley's voice joined in weeping. I cannot do this, Dad. They are going to eat me alive in there. Please, just 10%. We will sign whatever you want. Just get us out. I looked at Lucas. He was watching me, waiting to see if the old man would crumble, waiting to see if blood really was thicker than water. I took a deep breath, inhaling the scent of the spring flowers and the new baby. Preston Bradley, I said, my voice calm and final. Yes, Dad. We are here, we are listening, Preston said, hope rising in his voice. I am looking at my grandson right now, I said, looking down at little Harry. I am looking at the future, and I promised him that I would never let toxicity back into his life, Dad. What are you talking about? Preston screamed. No, do not do this. Consequences, boys, I said simply. You wanted my money. You didn't want me. You threw me away when I had nothing. Well, now I have everything, and I am choosing to share it with the people who stayed. Dad! Wait, Bradley shouted. I reached for the red button on the screen. Dad! Listen to me, Preston yelled, his voice cracking with panic. Can you hear me? Can you hear me? I looked at Lucas and smiled, a genuine smile that reached my eyes for the first time in years. Lucas, I said softly. Do you hear anything? Lucas looked at the phone where his brothers were screaming, and then he looked at me. He understood. He smiled back, shaking his head. No, Dad, he said, checking his watch. I do not hear a thing. Just the wind. I tapped the screen, ending the call. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full of birdsong and the rustling of leaves and the soft breathing of the baby. It was the sound of a new beginning. I looked out at the horizon where the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of gold and violet. My journey as a businessman was over. My journey as a father to Preston and Bradley was over. But my journey as a grandfather and as a man who finally understood the meaning of wealth was just beginning. I closed my eyes, holding the baby tighter, feeling the beat of his tiny heart against mine, proving that life goes on, that love wins, and that sometimes you have to lose everything to find out what really matters. Thank you for listening to my story. It was a long road from the cold streets of Chicago to this warm garden, but every step was worth it to find the truth about my family. If this story touched you, if it made you hug your children a little tighter, or reevaluate who you let into your life, please share it. Because the world needs to know that money is just paper, but family is the ink that writes our history. And I have a question for you parents out there. If you were in my shoes, if your children treated you like a burden when they thought you were broke, would you have forgiven them, or would you have done exactly what I did? Let me know in the comments below, and I read every single one. If you enjoyed the story of the beggar billionaire, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel for more stories about justice, redemption, and the complex reality of human nature. Support the channel if you can, so we can keep bringing you these narratives. See you in the next story. With love and respect, Harrison Caldwell signing off.